How can someone throw away a marriage the same evening she buries her father? After my father-in-law's funeral, my unemployed wife told me she no longer needed someone like me and walked out, sure that her inheritance would replace me. Months later, after the divorce was signed, her father's lawyer looked at her and asked very quietly if she had actually read the will. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. My name is Drake Torrin, and the day my father-in-law was buried felt like 3 different lives squeezed into one long stretch of hours. The first part was duty. I woke up before sunrise in the house my wife and I still technically shared, walked through rooms that already felt half empty, and started doing all the small tasks no one sees. I made coffee, not for myself, but for Lila and her aunt, who had stayed over. I ironed the black dress she left hanging on a chair. I checked the emails from the funeral home, confirmed the time with the church, printed the order of service on my old office printer. By the time Lila came downstairs, I had already loaded the flowers into the trunk and checked the route to the chapel twice. Lila walked into the kitchen like she was stepping onto a stage. She looked beautiful and exhausted at the same time, hair pinned up, makeup covering the red around her eyes. She did not look at the flowers or the papers I spread on the table. She only asked if I could drop her at the church entrance so she would not have to walk far in her heels. I said that of course I could. She nodded like that was the least I could do. Her aunt watched me from the doorway, lips pressed together, and thanked me softly. Then we all left. At the church, I parked where I knew it would not block the hearse. I helped the funeral staff carry the flower stands. They thanked me by name because I had signed every form and answered every call when Edward's health went downhill. Inside, though, my name floated away. People came for Lila. They came for Edward's sister, his cousins, his old workmates. Some shook my hand in a quick, distracted way and called me the son-in-law. A few, the ones who remembered how often they saw me at the hospital, held my shoulder for a second and said that Edward always spoke well of me. But most of the attention moved around me like water around a rock. I did not mind at first. Grief is loud and messy and full of blind spots. I chose a seat 2 rows behind Lila so she could sit with family and close friends. From there, I watched her shoulders shake during the opening hymn. I watched her reach for tissues and for Aunt Joan's hand. In my chest, there was a hollow feeling, but also a quiet current of memory. I remembered Edward's rough voice telling me, in the hospital room, that he was glad Lila had someone steady. He had looked at the plastic tubes and monitors around his bed and said that it was strange how, at the end of life, only a few people actually stayed. He told me that he trusted me more than most of his blood relatives when it came to numbers and decisions. He mentioned Margaret, his lawyer, and said there were papers in order. At the time, I just nodded and told him to rest. During the service, the pastor talked about building something solid, about how Edward had worked hard to provide for his family. Lila did a short eulogy. She spoke about her father as a giant in her life, about how he always told her she deserved the best. I knew he also told her that the best did not fall from the sky, but she left that part out. When she stepped down from the podium, she did not look at me. She sat between Aunt Joan and a man I recognized from the gym she went to, a man named Tyler. He had offered to help with some arrangements, she said earlier, because he knew people. He sat close, hand hovering near her elbow as if he had the right. After the burial, where I helped lower flowers into the grave and held umbrellas over people who forgot theirs, everyone moved to the reception hall a few blocks from the church. It was one of those multi-purpose community places. Harsh lighting trying to look soft, round tables with white cloths, big metal coffee urns. I made sure the slideshow of photos worked, that the music volume stayed low enough for people to talk. Lila disappeared into a circle of friends and cousins near the front. I hovered between tasks, checking with the caterer, carrying trays, moving chairs for older relatives. When I finally stopped moving, I stood near the coffee station with a paper cup in my hand and watched the room. Lila laughed with a group of people I did not recognize. I saw Tyler again, in a tight black shirt, leaning in as she talked. He looked like he belonged in a gym advertisement. She looked comfortable next to him. A few times, her eyes slid over me like I was part of the furniture. My chest tightened, not with jealousy, but with a tired sort of recognition. This had been happening for years in smaller ways. Today, it was just clearer. Later, I walked over to her group to ask if she needed anything. I thought it would be simple. I asked if she wanted water, or some food, or if she needed a break. The group went quiet for a heartbeat. Lila turned to me slowly. Eyes still a little red, but now sharp. She said that she was fine and that I did not need to hover around her like some personal assistant. She added, with half a laugh, that things would be different now anyway, because once everything was settled, she would not need someone like me to hold everything together. She said it in that casual, joking tone people use when they pretend to be light but aim to hurt. Everyone in the circle heard it. A few shifted on their feet. Someone looked at the floor. Tyler smirked in a way that reached only one side of his mouth. I felt the words land. I knew she was grieving. I knew emotions made people cruel, but this sentence did not come from grief. It came from something that had been growing a long time. I answered that I understood if she wanted more space and that I would go sit at the back for a while. My voice sounded steady, even to me. That almost surprised me. Inside, something small cracked, but nothing exploded. She rolled her eyes slightly and turned back to her friends. I saw, out of the corner of my eye, that a younger relative across the room was holding a phone up, recording the slideshow and the room, and the moment when Lila dismissed me. The red recording dot glowed. Then it vanished as they lowered the phone. I went to a table close to the wall and sat down. People came over in short waves. One cousin thanked me for organizing the service. Aunt Joan sat beside me for a moment and told me in a low voice that funerals bring out strange sides of people. She shook her head when she glanced toward Lila and Tyler. I said that Lila had lost her father and that it was a heavy day. Aunt Joan stared at me for a moment longer, like she was trying to decide something, then patted my hand and went to talk to another guest. The rest of the reception blurred into small tasks and short conversations. I threw away cups. I carried boxes to the car. I answered questions from the funeral director about remaining payments. All the invoices were in my email. All the money had come from my account. It felt almost normal to be the one doing the boring parts. I had done the boring parts of this family for years. When we finally left the hall, the sun was already low. The sky was that pale color you get in late afternoon, when the day cannot decide between light and evening. The ride home was almost silent. Lila sat in the back seat with Aunt Joan. I drove. At one point, Lila told her aunt that she would stay at her father's house for some time, because she felt closer to him there. She did not look at me when she said it. Aunt Joan said that she understood and mentioned that they would have to meet with Edward's lawyer soon. Lila answered that she already knew there would be a lot to handle, since she would be the one in charge of the estate now. There was a certain brightness in her voice when she said that. Back at our house, Aunt Joan went straight to the guest room to lie down. Lila walked into the bedroom and began pulling clothes from the closet into a suitcase. I leaned against the doorframe and watched her for a while, waiting for the right moment to ask something simple, like how long she planned to stay at Edward's or what she needed me to do with the bills. The right moment did not come. Each time I drew breath, she moved faster, as if energy came up through her hands in sharp bursts. Finally, I asked how long she planned to stay at her father's place. She did not stop folding a sweater as she answered. She said that she did not know, but that she needed distance from this house and from me, and that she could not keep pretending that our life together was what she wanted. She brought up all the old complaints in a tired list. I was too cautious. I did not take big risks. I was good at paying bills and fixing broken things, but not good at making her feel like she was living a big enough life. She said that with her father's legacy, she would have new possibilities and that this loss had made her see that she did not have to stay stuck. I could have argued. I could have reminded her of every failed project I had quietly funded, every late-night ride to the hospital, every spreadsheet I made for her father's debts. Instead, I sat on the edge of the bed and listened. When she finished, I told her that I heard her and that I would not stop her from making whatever decision she thought she needed to make. I added that I wished she had told me this before the day of the funeral. She shrugged and said that there was never a good time for endings. An hour later, I carried her suitcase to the car. She did not kiss my cheek or hug me. She just said that she would be in touch when things calmed down and when she had spoken with the lawyer about the estate. Then she drove away. I stood in the driveway and watched the taillights disappear around the corner. The street felt very quiet. Inside the house, everything sounded louder. The hum of the refrigerator, the ticking clock, my own footsteps. That night, I made myself a simple dinner I barely tasted and sat on the living room couch in my suit shirt, still buttoned at the wrist. The TV was off. I looked at the empty cushion where Lila usually sat, scrolling on her phone. Part of me waited for a message from her, something like a quick apology or a sign of doubt. Nothing came. My phone lay on the coffee table, screen dark. At some point, my eyes closed. When I woke, the room was dim, and for a second I did not know what time it was. Then my phone vibrated against the wood. The sudden sound in the quiet room made me sit up straighter. I picked it up and saw an unknown number on the screen, with a small label under it that said a law office name I recognized from Edward's files. The number on my screen came from the law office where Edward had done his paperwork. For a second, I thought about letting it go to voicemail. Then I answered and said my name. A calm female voice on the other end introduced herself as a paralegal from Margaret Green's office. She said that they were very sorry for my loss, and that Ms. Green wanted to schedule a time to speak with Edward's daughter and me about his estate. I asked if there was any problem. The paralegal said that there was no problem, just standard procedure, and that Edward had left instructions for a formal reading of his will with certain people present. She mentioned my name specifically. That surprised me. I had assumed everything would go through Lila and maybe Aunt Joan. Still, I told her that I would be available whenever they needed me. She said that they would send more details by email and mail, and that there were also some documents already at Edward's house that were meant for Lila and me together. After the call, I sat there with the phone in my hand, staring at the dark TV screen. The house felt even less like mine than it had an hour earlier. There were little empty spaces everywhere already, where Lila's things had been. A missing makeup bag in the bathroom, a gap in the closet, a bare spot on a shelf. I reminded myself that for now, my job was simple. Show up when the lawyer told us to, keep paying what needed to be paid, and try not to build any stories in my head before I had facts. The next morning, sunlight woke me early. It came through the same bedroom window where Lila used to sit on weekends, drinking coffee and scrolling on her phone while I made pancakes. The routine had felt comforting for a long time. Then slowly, it had started to feel like a performance I was doing alone. Lying there, I thought back to when we first met. It was 8 years earlier, at a friend's barbecue. I was 33, Lila was 28. She stood out in the crowd immediately. She laughed with her whole face, and she tilted her head when people spoke like she was soaking it all in. Back then, she worked in marketing for a local clothing store and complained that her job was chaotic. She said that she always ended up dating men who were exciting but unreliable. When she found out I worked in operations and accounting, she smiled and said that it sounded so stable. She meant it as a compliment then. In the first year of our relationship, she told people that she loved how predictable I was. She said that she could depend on me. We moved into a small apartment together and saved for a house. She cooked, I did the dishes. We watched shows in the evening and fell asleep on the couch more than we should have. We were not rich, but we were fine. The first crack showed up when she left her job. She said that the workplace was toxic, that she could not stand the boss anymore. I understood. I told her that we could handle it for a while with just my income, if she really wanted to look for something better. At first, that was the plan. She applied for a few positions, went to interviews, and complained that everything seemed dull. Then one day, she said that she had an idea for an online shop. She would sell curated items, use social media, build a brand. She said that working for herself would give her more freedom. I was cautious but supportive. We took some savings and set up a simple website. I helped with the numbers. She liked taking pictures and writing posts. It went fine for a few months. Then sales slowed. The website fees stayed the same. Our credit card balance grew. She blamed the algorithm and the economy. I paid the bills and said we could adjust. That became the pattern. Over the years, there were more ideas. A lifestyle blog, an online course about living boldly, a podcast with a friend. Each time, she said that this one would be the big one. Each time, I warned her about budgets and timelines. Each time, she grew angry when reality did not match the dream. I became, in her words, the man who thought too small. When I asked her to pick up some part-time work while building her projects, she said that going back to retail or an office would kill her spirit. While all of that was happening, Edward's health started to shift. At first, it was small things. He would complain about being tired after climbing stairs at his house. He would joke that running a small construction business aged him twice as fast. Then there were doctor visits, tests, and one day, the word cancer. His face did not change much when he said it. Lila cried. I listened for practical details. Edward was proud. He did not like asking for help. But his paperwork was a mess. He had files stacked in his study, invoices mixed with personal letters. One evening, he called me and asked if I could come over to look at some things. Lila drove me there, but she did not stay. She said that she had a call with a possible sponsor for her podcast. I followed Edward into his study, sat at his old wooden desk, and opened binders that had not been touched in years. We started with small things. I created simple spreadsheets of his debts and assets. We contacted a few suppliers who had been waiting for payment. I helped him set up a clearer system for invoices, and we talked through what would happen to his business if he got too sick to work. At some point, he said that he should probably talk to a lawyer about his will. He had one already, but he said it was old and not accurate anymore. A week later, he asked me to meet him at Margaret Green's office. The place was tidy and quiet, with shelves full of thick folders. Margaret was in her 50s, with short hair and a way of talking that made complicated things sound simple. She thanked me for bringing Edward's financial notes. She said that it was rare to see a son-in-law willing to spend so many evenings on someone else's documents. I said that it was not a big deal, that I just knew how to handle numbers. Lila did not come to those meetings. She said that the room full of legal terms made her head hurt. She said that she trusted her father and me to handle it. Later, when I tried to tell her about some of the decisions Edward was considering, she waved a hand and said she would deal with all of that when the time came. She preferred to focus on her projects and on finding ways to monetize her social media. At home, the distance between us grew. Little comments turned into patterns. If I suggested eating in instead of going out, she said that life was short and that I always wanted to save rather than live. When I brought up overdue bills, she took it as a personal attack. When I came home late after helping Edward go through another round of tests or paying another invoice, she said that I cared more about her father's business than I did about her dreams. At work, it was different. At the logistics company, people respected me. I had been there for over 10 years. I knew our routes, our suppliers, our weak spots. When a software update once threatened to throw our delivery schedule into chaos, I stayed late for 3 nights in a row to build a workaround. My manager, Renee, thanked me in front of the team. She said that without me, the company would have lost major clients that week. When people had a problem they did not know how to solve, they came to my desk. My quiet nature was an asset there, not a joke. It was always jarring to leave that environment and go home to the version of myself Lila seemed to see. At home, I was the man who did not think big enough. I was the one who asked annoying questions about interest rates and tax forms. I was the one who suggested that maybe we could not afford another invest in yourself course taught by someone on the internet. When Edward's illness moved to the center of all our lives, I tried to be careful not to turn everything into a debate. I drove him to treatments. I sat in hospital waiting rooms. I worked remotely on my laptop while nurses came in and out. Lila came when she could, which was less than she believed. When she was there, she focused on comforting him, which was good. She did not want to hear about test results or insurance paperwork. That part fell to me. In the last month of his life, Edward invited me to his study more often than he called his own brothers. One evening, after signing a stack of forms, he leaned back and said that he felt better knowing that someone like me was around. He said that he never expected a man as quiet and solid as me to marry his daughter, and that I had been better to both of them than they deserved. I told him not to say that. He shook his head and said that people who looked calm on the surface often carried more weight than anyone realized. He mentioned again that there were documents with Margaret, and that everything would be clear later. I did not ask for details. It felt like private ground between him and Lila. After the funeral, a few days passed in a gray blur. I went back to work briefly, mostly to keep my mind from sinking completely into the empty house. Renee called me into her office and asked how I was holding up. I told her that I was managing. I told her that Lila had gone to stay at Edward's house for a while. She raised an eyebrow in a way that said more than any words. She reminded me not to let people treat me like a machine that would keep running without rest. I nodded and thanked her. Then I went back to my spreadsheets. One afternoon, Aunt Joan called and asked if I could come by Edward's house to help move some boxes. She said that Lila was overloaded with visitors and that there were things in the study that needed sorting. I drove over after work. The house smelled like dust and old coffee. The study was exactly as I remembered it, except now there was a framed photo of Edward and Lila on the desk, placed there recently. We worked quietly, Joan and I, packing up books and old construction catalogs. She asked in a low voice if I was doing all right living alone. I said that I was getting used to it. She frowned, said that Lila always had a dramatic streak, and that grief could do strange things. I agreed without adding anything. It felt disloyal to say more. As I reached for a stack of folders, I noticed a sealed envelope resting on the corner of the desk. It had the law firm's logo in the top left corner and our names typed on the front. Lila Hardy and Drake Torrin. The sight of both names together made my stomach tighten. I picked it up and turned it over. It was still sealed. No fingerprints along the edge, no bent corners. I guess this was what the paralegal had meant on the phone. I considered opening it to see what it said. I also considered that if I did, Lila might accuse me of going behind her back. In the end, I placed it back on the desk, exactly where it had been, and told Aunt Joan that there was mail from the lawyer. She said that she would remind Lila. Then she went to answer the doorbell. Voices floated in from the hallway. Lila had arrived, along with Tyler and 2 of her friends. They came into the study in a wave of perfume and loud conversation. Lila kissed Aunt Joan on the cheek and glanced at me like I was another piece of furniture. Tyler shook my hand briefly and said that it was good to see me. His tone said the opposite. One of Lila's friends asked if they should start taking measurements for the changes Lila wanted to make to the house. Lila laughed and said that they would wait until everything cleared, but that she had big plans. She looked at me and said that I did not need to worry about any of this, that she would handle the estate with the lawyer. She said that I had enough to do with my job. I said that if she needed any help with paperwork, I was available. She shrugged and said that her father had left things for her, and that this was one part of her life she wanted to control herself. I did not argue. I told her that I would finish moving the last box and then head out. As I walked past the desk, I saw the envelope still lying there. Lila had not touched it. In the hallway, I heard her friend put a phone on speaker. A voice asked how she was doing. Lila said that it had been a hard week, but that she was almost through the worst of it. She added in a lighter tone that once the will and everything came through, she would basically be set for life and could finally live the way she wanted. Tyler laughed in agreement. Aunt Joan stayed quiet. I paused at the doorway of the study and looked back one last time. The envelope with both our names on it sat untouched in the pool of light from the desk lamp, while Lila leaned against the doorframe, scrolling her phone and talking about all the freedom that was about to arrive. The envelope with our names on it stayed in my mind for days, like a light on in another room. I did not touch it. I did not ask Lila about it either. Part of me still believed that once things calmed down, we would sit at a table somewhere, open it together, and talk like adults about whatever was inside. That part of me was behind the rest of my life, though, walking slower. The email from the mediator arrived about a week after the funeral. It was short and polite. It said that Lila had contacted their office to start divorce proceedings and that they wanted to schedule a first meeting with both of us present. I read the message 3 times, even though the words were simple. I sat at the kitchen table, staring at my laptop, while the clock on the wall ticked. I should not have been surprised. Lila had already said that she wanted distance, that she did not want to pretend anymore. But seeing the word divorce in a formal email, with our full names and a date, made it real in a way that private words did not. It felt like turning a card over and seeing the symbol you were hoping not to see. I wrote back and said that I would attend. Then I closed the laptop and sat there for a while, listening to the quiet house. My coffee had gone cold. I drank it anyway. The taste fit the moment.
Mm-hmm.
A few days later, I walked into the mediator's office on the 3rd floor of an anonymous building. The waiting area had neutral colors and soft chairs, like it was trying not to be anything. A bookshelf held a few magazines about families, finance, and communication. I arrived 10 minutes early, because that is how my mind works. Lila and her lawyer arrived 5 minutes late. Lila wore a fitted blazer and jeans, her hair pulled back, makeup done carefully. She looked more like the version of herself from our early years than the tired, angry woman at the funeral. Her lawyer was a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a folder under her arm. They walked past me at first, then Lila turned and gave me a quick nod. She said that she hoped we could get through this without drama. I said that I wanted the same thing. In the meeting room, the mediator explained ground rules in a calm voice. No yelling, no talking over each other. We would go through assets, debts, and any points of conflict. The mediator spoke like someone who had said these things many times. I listened and watched Lila's face. She looked serious, but also lighter, like she had finally started a process she had been thinking about for months. When it was her turn to speak, Lila said that our marriage had been emotionally over for a long time and that she needed a life where she could grow without feeling held back. She called me a good man, but said that my mindset did not match the life she wanted. She painted a picture of herself stuck in a gray routine. I was there in every sentence as the dull background. Her lawyer then laid out what they thought was fair. They suggested that Lila keep Edward's house as sentimental property and that I keep our smaller marital home, which was still under a mortgage. They wanted half of my savings and retirement accounts to be split. They wanted joint debts, including a credit line Lila mainly used for her projects, to be reviewed, which sounded like they hoped I would shoulder most of it. There was an unspoken idea behind their words, that soon Lila would have new money from the estate, and that this divorce was simply a way to rearrange the board before that happened. I listened, took notes, and asked questions like I would in a work meeting. Did they have a suggested timeline? How would we handle the joint account until then? At one point, Lila referred to my father's legacy that I will be managing, like it was already in her pocket. Her lawyer did not correct her. When it was my turn, I said that I did not want a long fight. I agreed to keep the house and the mortgage that came with it. I agreed to divide the savings by a formula, though I asked that we consider the years I had been the only one working. The mediator wrote numbers on a pad. The lawyer frowned once or twice, but not strongly. They knew I was not there to drag this out. I noticed something in that room. Lila and her lawyer kept mentioning the estate, the inheritance, the way her future finances would look. They did not seem to consider the idea that the will might have its own conditions, or that things could shift. To them, it was a fixed fact. Large assets were coming to Lila. This divorce was planning around that. There was a moment near the end of the meeting when Lila said that she wanted to get all this small stuff sorted before the estate meeting so she could focus on making the right decisions for her father's business. She did not look at me when she said it, but the word small landed. Our years together, the roof over my head, my savings, my retirement, all small stuff. I did not argue. I simply made a note on my pad and underlined it. We scheduled a follow-up, then left. In the hallway, Lila said that she appreciated me not making things harder. She said that once everything was finalized, we could each move on. I nodded and said that I hoped she got the life she wanted. It was true, even if the path to it cut straight through the middle of our history. A few days later, she asked to meet at a cafe to go over some practical details. I chose a quiet place downtown with big windows. When I walked in, I saw that she had not come alone. Tyler sat next to her at a table by the window, one arm on the back of her chair. 2 of her friends were there too. They had coffee and pastries, half finished. The table looked like a celebration, not a hard conversation. Lila waved me over and said that they had been talking about new plans. She said that once everything with the will and the business was sorted, she might start a new venture, maybe a space that combined a cafe, a studio, and a co-working area. Her eyes shone while she described it. Tyler nodded and jumped in, talking about investors he knew and how legacy funds could be used to create something fresh. Every time he said legacy funds, he glanced at Lila like they already belonged to both of them. When I tried to bring the talk back to our divorce logistics, what to do with joint subscriptions, the car we shared, Lila brushed it off. She said that those details were boring and that the mediator would handle most of it. She added that she did not want to waste her energy on petty admin when a whole new life was opening up. One of her friends laughed and said that it must feel amazing to finally let go of dead weight. She said it lightly, but there was a clear direction to the phrase. Tyler turned to me at one point and said that he hoped there were no hard feelings, that life took people in different directions. He said that what Lila wanted now was more aligned with growth-minded people. The implication was obvious. I smiled a little and told him that I did not have hard feelings, only clear eyes. That seemed to confuse him for a second. Sitting at that table, listening to them talk about their future investments, I had a strange sensation. It felt like I was watching them stand on a floor they assumed was solid concrete, while I could see, somewhere in my peripheral vision, that the edges of that floor were not as firm as they believed. I did not know exactly what the will said yet, but I knew enough to realize that they were acting on assumptions, not facts. On the walk home from the cafe, my mind finally settled into a new position. Until then, I had still been trying to balance 2 roles, the man who wanted to save a marriage and the man who needed to protect himself. The cafe conversation ended the first role. I did not feel anger. I felt something like a quiet click inside, like a lock turning. That evening, I sat in the bedroom of our house, which felt less and less like ours. The bed was too big, with only one person in it. The closet had empty hangers where Lila's dresses used to be. Instead of lying down, I went into the small room we had once called the office. It had a desk, an old printer, and boxes stacked in the corner. I pulled down a carton marked tax stuff and opened it on the floor. Inside were old folders, pay stubs, receipts, bank statements, copies of transfers I had made over the years. I saw the record of the personal loan I gave to Edward when his business hit a rough patch. I saw the hospital bills I had paid when insurance did not cover enough. I saw the credit card statements showing charges from Lila's projects, all under my name. I did not look at these papers with bitterness. I looked at them like a mechanic looks at a stack of parts. Each one was a small piece of a bigger machine. Until now, I had been throwing them into boxes and hoping I would never have to see them again. Now I started to organize them. I made piles on the floor. One for medical bills, one for business-related loans to Edward, one for household expenses that I had covered alone during the years Lila had not worked. I created simple labels with sticky notes. The desk lamp threw a yellow circle of light over everything. It felt like the first time in a long time that I was doing something for myself, even though the papers were about other people. Around midnight, I took a break and sat on the edge of the bed. I thought about Edward's words in the hospital, about trusting me, and about documents making things clear. I thought about the sealed envelope in his study. I thought about the call from Margaret's office and the upcoming estate meeting. Then I thought about the look on Lila's face at the cafe when she talked about being set for life. In that moment, I made a quiet decision. I would keep being myself, calm, methodical, respectful. I would not shout. I would not play games in the shadows. But I would also stop assuming that other people would automatically protect what I had built. I would let the systems they trusted, contracts, wills, accounts, speak. And I would be ready to say, at the right time, exactly what needed to be said. I went back to the desk, turned on the printer, and began scanning documents into neat folders on my computer. One by one, the pages slid through the scanner, their soft mechanical sound filling the room. It was boring work, the kind I had always done for other people. That night, it felt different. It felt like placing bricks, slowly, into a wall that would stand between me and whatever storms were coming. The nights after I started scanning those documents all blurred into a pattern. I worked my regular hours at the logistics company, came home to a house that felt like an empty shell, made a simple dinner, and then went into the little office to feed papers into the scanner. It was not exciting work. It was the same kind of thing I had done for Edward and for my own job for years. The only difference now was that I was doing it with a different mindset. Every page I saved felt like a quiet answer to a question that hadn't been asked yet. A few days into this routine, an envelope from Green and Associates arrived in the mail at my house. The logo on the corner matched the one I had seen on the sealed letter in Edward's study. My name was printed alone on the front this time. I stood in the hallway with the envelope in my hand for a long moment, feeling the weight of it. Then I opened it. Inside there was a formal letter from Margaret's office giving a general outline of the steps ahead for the estate. There was a date for an upcoming meeting, still a few weeks away, and a list of people expected to attend. My name was there again, along with Lila's, Aunt Joan's, and a few others from Edward's side of the family. There was also a second, thicker document packet for my records. It was not the full will, but pieces connected to my role in Edward's planning. I took the papers to the kitchen table and read them slowly. There were sections full of language I had seen before in estate documents, standard phrases about distributions and duties. I also saw references to a trust that would hold most of Edward's assets instead of sending them directly to one person. My eyes moved over lines that mentioned roles like executor, trustee, and beneficiary. My own name appeared more often than I expected. I did not read any single section as a promise. I read them as parts of a picture that was still not complete. The letter suggested that I schedule a short appointment with Margaret before the full family meeting if I had questions. I stared at that sentence for a good minute. Then I picked up my phone and called the office. The same calm paralegal answered. I said that I had received the documents and would like to meet briefly. She checked the calendar and gave me a time for the following week. The day of that appointment, I left work early with Renee's blessing. She knew where I was going. When I told her, she just said that it was good I was talking to someone who understood the legal side. She reminded me to write down all my questions and not just nod along. I thanked her and slipped my notebook into my bag. Margaret's office was on the 5th floor of a downtown building, not fancy, but solid. The waiting area smelled faintly of coffee and copier toner. When I walked in, the paralegal recognized me and led me past a row of doors to a corner office. Margaret was at her desk, glasses on, going through a stack of files. She stood up to shake my hand, and I saw the same steady gaze I remembered from the planning meetings with Edward. She asked how I was holding up. I told her that I was handling things one piece at a time. She nodded, like that answer made sense to her. Then she got straight to business. She explained that Edward had updated his will and related documents during the last year, and that those documents now guided everything they were doing. She said that my support with his finances and the loans I had given him were not invisible in that process. She did not show me the whole will. That was reserved for the official reading with everyone present, but she walked me through some of the structure in general terms. She said that Edward had chosen to put most of his property and business interests into a trust with conditions attached because he wanted to protect his legacy from bad decisions and from people who treated it lightly. She said that my name appeared in more than one role and that there were references to my long-term support. At one point, she mentioned that Lila had come in months before to sign an acknowledgement that she had read and understood parts of the plan. Margaret said that she had encouraged Lila to take her time and ask questions, but that Lila had been in a hurry and said she trusted her father. I pictured Lila signing something thick without flipping all the pages, already thinking about how to spend what she thought would come. It fit too well. Margaret also asked me if I had any records of the money I had lent Edward or the bills I had covered. I told her that I did and that I had been organizing them. She said that was wise, and that documentation always helped when questions came up later. She made a note in her file, then looked at me for a long second. She said that, from a professional standpoint, she had seen many families fall apart over money and pride, and that the calm person with the best records usually ended up standing more firmly than the loudest voice. I did not take that as a promise. I took it as a reminder. After the meeting, I did not go straight home. Instead, I walked a few blocks to a small neighborhood bar I liked. It was the kind of place that stayed half empty even on weekends, with old wooden stools and a quiet TV playing sports without sound. I sat at the bar and ordered a soda. My head was full of what Margaret had said, but not in a frantic way. It felt like someone had given me a map with some of the important roads outlined, even if I could not see every street yet. I was halfway through my drink when Renee walked in. I had texted her earlier to say I would be at that bar if she wanted to stop by. She took the stool next to mine and ordered a drink of her own. She asked how it went with the lawyer. I told her the basics, leaving out details that were not mine alone. I said that Edward had been more thoughtful with his planning than some people assumed, and that my role in his last years had not gone unnoticed. I also said that it was clear the estate would not be as simple as Lila believed. Renee listened without interrupting. Then she said that this was exactly why she had told me to document everything. She said that people could rewrite stories with emotions, but paper remembered what actually happened. She reminded me again that being quiet did not mean letting others take advantage of me. I told her that I understood that better now. She smiled and said that this was the Drake she saw at work every day, the one who calmly held the company together without bragging. We sat there for a while, not talking about law or money. We talked about work, about a new software update coming, about her kids. It felt good to talk about something normal. When I left, the air outside was cool and the sky was fading to dark. I walked to my car with a lighter step than I had expected. The following weekend, Aunt Joan called again. She said that there were still files in Edward's study that needed sorting and asked if I could help one more time. I agreed. When I arrived, the house looked the same, but there were more signs of Lila's presence now. A new throw blanket on the couch, scented candles on the table, a stack of magazines about design. In the study, cardboard boxes stood half filled with books and folders. Aunt Joan and I worked side by side for a while, moving papers into boxes marked Keep, Shred, and Maybe. She seemed tired. She said that the last few weeks had been a lot to process. She also said that she did not always recognize the way grief came out in Lila. I said that everyone handled loss in different ways. It was the safest answer I had. We were putting old project files into a box when the front door opened and loud voices came in. Lila called out a quick greeting and stepped into the study with Tyler behind her. They both looked like they had come from some casual event, dressed in clean jeans and fresh shirts. Lila said that she hoped we were not throwing away anything important, and laughed. She started talking about knocking down one of the walls once everything was officially hers to make the room brighter. Tyler walked to the window and looked out at the yard. He said that with some renovation and the right branding, the house could become something much more valuable, maybe a mixed-use space for events and retreats. He spoke like he had already run the numbers in his head. Lila nodded along and said that she could not wait to make changes once the lawyer finished releasing the estate. Aunt Joan stayed quiet, but her jaw tightened. I saw her glance at Edward's old desk, at the empty chair behind it, and then at Tyler as he talked about redoing everything. There was a sadness in her eyes that she did not try to hide. I did not join the conversation. I kept putting files in boxes. At one point, Lila picked up a framed photo of her and her father from the desk. She said that she would probably move most of the furniture out and bring in something more modern, but that this photo would stay. She also said that she was sure her father would be happy to see her taking charge and finally living big. Aunt Joan quietly said that Edward had many wishes, some of them written down. Lila shrugged and said that she trusted that the will would reflect what he always told her, which was that she deserved the best. I did not remind her of the other things he had said, about work and responsibility, and the value of people who showed up. That part was not my place to argue right then. Instead, I finished taping up a box marked Accounts, and carried it to the hallway. As I passed the desk, I saw that the old sealed envelope with both our names was gone. Either Lila had finally opened it, or it had been moved. I did not ask which. On my way home, I stopped at my bank branch. It was something I had been meaning to do ever since I started digging through the old papers. I sat down with a banker in a small meeting room with a glass wall. I explained that my marriage was ending, that my father-in-law had passed, and that I wanted to review my accounts. The banker pulled up my information on a screen and walked me through my balances, my automatic payments, and my credit lines. I asked specifically about the personal loan I had given Edward years ago, the one we had written up informally and then updated when his business struggled again. The banker found the records of the transfers and the signed note we had filed with them. She said that, from their perspective, I was a creditor of his. With a clear paper trail, she could not say how that would play into the estate, but she said that if the estate lawyer needed confirmation, they had it. I also moved what I could of my liquid savings into an account with just my name on it, not to hide anything, but to make sure that the paths were clear and simple when the divorce division came. The banker explained what she was doing with calm, practiced words. When we finished, she printed out a packet of updated statements for me. I put them in my bag with the same care I gave to the old loan notes. Back at my rental apartment, the small office corner had started to look like a command center. There were neat stacks of files on a shelf, each in its own labeled folder. My laptop sat in the middle of the desk with an external hard drive beside it. I had backed up everything twice, once on the drive, once in a password-protected online account. I also had a simple USB stick with key documents in case I needed to bring something physically to a meeting. One evening, as I was renaming a few scanned files, my email notification sound chimed. I clicked over without thinking. At the top of my inbox was a new message from Margaret's office. The subject line was simple: Estate Meeting, Final Will Review. The subject line on the email hung in the center of my screen like it had weight. Estate Meeting, Final Will Review. For a moment, I felt the same stillness I had felt the night Lila left the house with her suitcase. A quiet awareness that the next phase of my life was coming, and that whatever happened at that meeting would be something I could not undo. I clicked the email. It was short. The date, the time, the address of the law firm, the expected attendees. My name was listed second, right after Lila's. Aunt Joan was listed too, along with a cousin who helped manage Edward's old company. There was also a line saying that attendees would receive the full will and trust documents during the meeting and that all questions would be addressed then. I sat back in my chair and let out a long breath. Until that moment, everything had been preparation. Organizing files, scanning documents, talking quietly with Margaret, listening to the assumptions people made around me. But the meeting itself was the point where shadows would become shape. It would be the moment when everyone saw the same information at the same time. I closed my laptop and walked to the kitchen. I poured myself a glass of water and drank it slowly. My heart wasn't racing. It wasn't even beating hard. It just felt steady, like it had accepted that this was coming long before my mind did. Over the next few days, I moved through my routines with a strange calm. At work, I focused on my tasks with even more precision than usual. I reviewed shipments, approved schedules, and explained a new process to 2 junior staff members. Renee noticed. She pulled me aside at one point and asked if everything was okay. I told her that the estate meeting was coming soon and that I was ready for it. She gave me a look that mixed pride and concern. She reminded me again to stay grounded and to trust the preparation I had done. I told her I would. In the evenings, I sat in my apartment and reread the documents I had scanned, not because I wanted to fight with anyone, but because I wanted clarity. I went through the loan records, the hospital bills, the transfers I had made during Edward's last years. I went through emails from Margaret, short notes from Edward, and even the funeral program. I sorted them into clean digital folders. I printed a few copies of key items, nothing dramatic, just the kind of things a reasonable person might bring if questions came up. One night, around 10, I got a message from Lila. It was the first direct contact from her in weeks. She said, "Hey, just checking that you're coming to the estate meeting. Margaret said both of us have to be there. It shouldn't take long." I stared at the message for a few seconds. There was no anger in it, no warmth either, just a tone like someone confirming a dentist appointment. I typed back, "Yes, I'll be there." She did not reply. The next morning, while I was eating breakfast, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. When I answered, the voice identified herself as the assistant of my divorce lawyer, saying that all the latest documents were ready for signing. I had already reviewed the terms. They were not perfect, but they were fair enough, and I didn't want to drag anything out. I scheduled a time that afternoon. At the lawyer's office, I signed my portion of the divorce papers. It felt strange doing it alone in a quiet conference room with the faint sound of printers humming down the hall. The lawyer explained each page, but I already knew what I was signing. I had read every paragraph twice. I asked a few questions, mostly procedural ones. When we finished, she gathered the papers and placed them in a neat stack. She asked if I had any final concerns. I shook my head. She wished me luck with the estate and said that sometimes wills bring closure people don't expect. I thanked her. I didn't ask what she meant. After leaving the office, I sat in my car for a few minutes, watching people walk past on the sidewalk. Some were laughing, some were on their phones, some were carrying groceries. Life didn't pause for anyone's divorce. The world kept moving. For the first time in a while, I felt like I was moving too. The day before the estate meeting, I spent the evening going over a checklist. It was simple: printed statements, digital backups, a notebook with questions, a pen. I set everything on my desk and stared at it. I didn't feel pride or excitement, just readiness. That night, I slept better than I expected. The morning of the meeting, I woke early, even before my alarm. I made coffee, shaved, and put on a clean shirt and jacket. Not a suit, but something respectful. I wasn't dressing to impress anyone. I just wanted to show up steady. As I left the apartment, I double-checked that I had my notebook and the USB drive in my bag. Not because I planned to weaponize anything, but because I believed in being prepared. Being the calm one didn't mean being unarmed. It meant being ready. Traffic was light. The sky was overcast, but not in a gloomy way, more like the world was wrapped in a soft quiet. I parked in the garage below the law firm's building, turned off the engine, and sat for one last breath. Inside the elevator, I saw my reflection in the metal doors. I looked tired, but clear-eyed. The doors opened to the 5th floor, and I walked into the lobby of Green and Associates. The lobby was bright, with high ceilings and framed certificates on the walls. A receptionist greeted me and told me I was early. She offered me water. I said yes and sat in one of the chairs by the window. A few minutes later, Aunt Joan arrived. She looked composed but tense. She sat beside me and clasped her hands together. She asked me how I was doing. I told her I was managing. She nodded and said that she hoped this meeting would bring peace. I said I hoped the same. Then the elevator dinged again. Lila stepped out with Tyler beside her. She was dressed in a way that suggested she had thought carefully about the impression she wanted to make. Fitted blouse, tailored pants, hair styled, makeup done with precision. Tyler wore a soft gray button-down shirt and confident expression, like he believed he belonged here. Lila greeted the receptionist, then turned to me. She said she hoped everything would be civil today. Her tone was polite, but distant. Not angry, just sure of her footing. Tyler glanced at me and gave a tight smile, almost smug. They sat a few chairs away. I noticed Lila scrolling her phone, probably texting friends about how she was finally going to handle her father's estate. Tyler whispered something to her. She laughed quietly. Aunt Joan watched them for a long moment, sadness gathering in her face. More relatives began to arrive, Edward's cousin, a representative from his old company, and a few others. The lobby grew fuller, the quiet air buzzing with low conversation. I stayed silent. I waited. After a few minutes, Margaret appeared from the hallway. She looked calm, professional, and focused. She greeted everyone politely, then scanned the room until her eyes found me. She walked over. She asked if I was ready. I told her I was. Then she turned to the group and said the words that seemed to cut through every conversation in the room. "We're ready for the reading. Please follow me into the conference room." The room fell silent. Lila stood up, smoothed her blouse, and walked forward as if stepping into a spotlight. Tyler followed, adjusting his collar. Aunt Joan rose slowly, steadying herself with one hand on the chair. I stood, picked up my notebook, and walked behind them. The hallway to the conference room felt longer than it really was. The carpet softened everyone's footsteps. The door to the conference room was wide open, showing a long table, chairs around it, a projector on one side, and neat stacks of folders laid out at each seat. I paused at the threshold for a brief second. I wasn't nervous. I wasn't angry. I was prepared. Margaret stepped in first, motioning for everyone to take their seats. And as I walked into the room behind the others, I realized that this was the moment everything had been moving toward. Not the funeral, not the divorce, not the arguments or silences, but this, the place where truth would finally have a voice. And every person in that room would hear the same thing at the same time. The conference room felt colder than the lobby, even though the air was the same. Maybe it was the long table, or the neat rows of folders set out like silent witnesses. Everyone took seats slowly. Lila near the center, Tyler beside her, Aunt Joan across from them. I sat 2 chairs down from Lila, close enough to see her expression, but far enough not to distract her. Margaret closed the door and walked to the head of the table. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. The room was already still. She began with the formalities: Edward's full name, date of passing, confirmation that this was the final version of his will and trust documents. She explained that copies would be handed out at the end. She thanked everyone for being on time. Then she opened a thick folder. She read small bequests first: a set of tools to a cousin, a watch to a friend, a sum of money to a local charity. People nodded quietly. Lila sat straight, waiting. Then Margaret turned a page and continued. Edward's house, the majority of his savings, and his business shares would not go directly to any single person. Instead, they had been placed into a trust, something designed to protect them. She explained the structure calmly: a trustee to oversee the assets, a primary beneficiary under certain conditions, and a contingent beneficiary if those conditions were not met. Lila leaned forward, smiling slightly. Tyler folded his arms like he expected confirmation of what they had been planning for weeks. Margaret continued reading. Edward had written that he wanted his legacy protected by the person who lived with integrity, provided stability, and honored commitments without being asked. Those were his words. I heard chairs shift around the table. Margaret went on. The primary beneficiary of the trust would be Lila. Ifrifu. She remained married to me for at least 1 year after Edward's death, and did not publicly demean or disavow me as her partner during that period. Violating either condition would transfer her entire beneficial interest to the contingent beneficiary. The room changed temperature. Lila blinked. Once, twice. She opened her mouth, then closed it. Tyler stared at Margaret like he didn't understand the language. Margaret continued, steady as stone. She explained that Lila had signed an acknowledgement of these terms months before Edward died. The acknowledgement confirmed she had read and understood the conditions. Margaret slid a copy of that signed page onto the table, right in front of Lila. Lila stared at her own signature. She whispered, "This must be a mistake." Margaret shook her head gently, then she turned on the projector. A short video played, a clip from the funeral reception. It showed Lila standing with her friends, Tyler in view. Her voice was clear. She said, "I no longer need someone like him." The clip ended. Silence spread like a wave. Margaret looked at the group. "This statement qualifies as public disavowal of your spouse," she said, her voice calm. "It was made within days of Edward's passing. Under the trust conditions, that voids your position as primary beneficiary." Lila's face lost all color. She turned to Tyler, who had gone rigid, mouth slightly open. He looked like someone trying to grab something in the dark and finding only air. Aunt Joan sat very still, hands folded, eyes on the table. She looked sad, but not surprised. Margaret continued with the final part. "Under the terms of the trust, upon forfeiture by the primary beneficiary, the full beneficial interest transfers to the contingent beneficiary, Drake Torrin." My name echoed faintly against the conference room walls. There was no triumph in me, only a quiet acceptance, like a door clicking shut exactly the way it was built to. Margaret placed a small set of keys on the table in front of me, keys to Edward's house and his office at the business. Then she slid over the trustee acceptance documents. I picked up the pen. My hand was steady. While I signed, Lila whispered something I couldn't hear, something thin and frayed. Oh, Tyler looked at the floor. A cousin coughed softly. Papers rustled somewhere down the table. When I finished signing, I set the pen down and closed the folder. Margaret thanked everyone for attending. No one moved at first. The air felt heavy, as if the room itself understood the shift that had just taken place. I stood, picked up the keys, and walked toward the door. Behind me, chairs scraped. Someone murmured my name, but I didn't turn around. The last thing I heard before the door closed was the sound of Lila's breath catching, small, sharp, the sound of a world rearranging itself in an instant. Then the door clicked shut, and the room disappeared behind me.